What if the biggest lie about success is not that hard work matters, but that we all start from the same place? Every year, millions of people are told the same story. Work harder, take more risks, believe in yourself. And yet, many who follow this advice still find themselves stuck. Not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack discipline, but because they are playing a game whose rules were written long before they even joined. In modern economies, effort is only one variable. Invisible systems, access to capital, information, networks, often determine who can move forward and who remains trapped. To understand how success really works, we first need to understand something far less comfortable. The starting line is not where we think it is. We've all heard the same story. The student who dropped out, the entrepreneur who started with nothing, the billionaire who supposedly built everything through pure determination. These stories are everywhere. Books, interviews, social media, motivational videos. They all repeat the same comforting message. Everyone has the same 24 hours. Anyone can succeed if they try hard enough. But from the perspective of economics, and more importantly, risk, this might be one of the most seductive illusions of our time. Because in reality, we are not starting from the same point, and we are definitely not playing the same game. In a market economy, success is not determined by effort alone. It is shaped by capital, by access, by timing, and by the invisible systems that were built long before we even entered the race. For some people, failure is just an expensive lesson. For others, it can mean losing everything. Imagine two individuals deciding to start a business. One has savings, family support, and a network of experienced advisors. If their first project fails, they can simply try again. The loss becomes tuition, a temporary setback in a long journey. But for someone starting with limited resources, the situation is completely different. Their investment might represent years of savings, or even borrowed money. Every decision carries enormous pressure. Every mistake feels irreversible. They are walking a financial tightrope without a safety net. This difference creates something economists call risk appetite. People with strong financial backing can afford to take bold risks. They can experiment, pivot, and wait for long-term results. Meanwhile, those who lack that protection are often forced to prioritize survival. They choose safer paths. They move more cautiously. Not because they lack ambition, but because the cost of failure is simply too high. Over time, this pressure can quietly reshape behavior. Creativity becomes constrained. Long-term thinking is replaced by short-term necessity, and opportunities that require patience begin to slip away. Another invisible advantage lies in information. In modern economies, information is a form of currency. Some people grow up in environments where strategic insights flow naturally, through conversations at dinner tables, professional networks, or industry connections. They learn how markets move, how deals are structured, how timing influences success. These lessons are rarely found in textbooks. They are absorbed gradually, often without conscious effort. By the time they enter the workforce, they are already equipped with a mental framework that many others must spend years trying to build. Social capital plays an equally powerful role. For some individuals, their first clients, their first investors, their first opportunities are only one introduction away. A single phone call can open doors that would otherwise remain closed. Meanwhile, others must invest countless hours building credibility from scratch, pitching ideas, searching for connections, and competing in overcrowded markets. This is not simply a difference in luck. It is a difference in starting conditions. Understanding this reality is not about becoming pessimistic. It is about gaining clarity. Because once you recognize that the game is uneven, you can begin to make smarter, strategic decisions. You stop comparing your journey to carefully curated success stories. You become more deliberate about risk, and you start focusing on building the kind of assets that truly matter over time. Not just money, but knowledge, relationships, and resilience. These are the foundations that slowly shift your position in the system, and they may ultimately matter far more than the myth of overnight success. Another invisible gap lies in mindset. Some people grow up learning how to play the game. Others are taught only how to follow the rules. For many individuals from privileged environments, financial thinking begins early. Long before they earn their first paycheck, they are already exposed to conversations about investments, ownership, leverage, and long-term strategy. While some households focus on saving utility bills or managing daily expenses, others are discussing portfolio allocation, business expansion, or how to make money generate more money, even while they sleep. This difference in implicit knowledge creates a powerful divide. It explains why sudden wealth often disappears just as quickly as it appears. Without the mental framework to manage it, money becomes fragile. At the same time, those who were trained to understand capital systems can often rebuild wealth even after major losses. Because their real advantage was never just money, it was the ability to create it. Credit access is another decisive factor. Modern financial systems are built on a paradox. The easiest people to borrow money are often those who need it the least. Individuals with strong financial backgrounds typically have clean credit histories, valuable collateral, and institutional trust. Banks compete to offer them favorable interest rates and large credit limits. They use this inexpensive capital to acquire assets, land, businesses, technology, allowing wealth to compound at a pace that far exceeds the cost of borrowing. Meanwhile, those with limited resources face the opposite reality. When they need capital the most, to start a venture or simply stabilize their lives, they are often categorized as high-risk borrowers. Loans become expensive, conditions become restrictive, and the financial system quietly pushes them further toward vulnerability. Over time, this dynamic reinforces inequality. Lower borrowing costs accelerate wealth creation for the privileged. Higher borrowing costs drain the already limited resources of the disadvantaged. In many cases, people end up working not only for income, but to pay the price of their own financial insecurity. Risk tolerance also plays a crucial psychological role. Think of life as a long, strategic game. The player with the largest stack of chips always has greater freedom to experiment. For some, failure is survivable. A failed venture may mean temporary embarrassment, but not permanent damage. Family support, accumulated assets, or professional networks can provide opportunities to start again. This safety net enables bold thinking. It allows individuals to pursue high-risk, high-reward ideas that might eventually transform their financial trajectory. But for those without such protection, every decision feels existential. Investments are tied directly to survival. A single misstep can threaten stability, reputation, and future prospects. Under this pressure, caution becomes a necessity. People choose safer options with smaller returns. They hesitate to commit fully to opportunities that could change their lives. Not because they lack courage, but because the margin for error is painfully narrow. Recognizing these invisible forms of capital is not meant to create resentment. It is meant to create awareness. When you understand that wealth is supported by entire ecosystems, networks, knowledge, institutional trust, and psychological security, you begin to see success differently. Instead of chasing quick money, you start building strategic assets. You invest in credibility. You develop meaningful relationships. You learn how financial systems actually function. These elements take time to accumulate, but they gradually shift your position within the economic landscape. There is also a harsh reality rarely discussed in traditional financial education. Poverty often carries hidden costs. Without financial buffers, people are forced into suboptimal decisions simply to maintain stability. They cannot always purchase in bulk. They cannot always access discounted opportunities. They cannot always wait for better timing. Small inefficiencies compound. Higher prices, short-term solutions, and urgent expenses quietly erode long-term potential. This phenomenon has been described by economists as the cost of being poor. It is not merely a lack of money. It is a lack of financial flexibility. And flexibility in modern economies can be just as valuable as capital itself. One of the most brutal consequences of financial scarcity appears in everyday consumption. When resources are limited, people are often forced into short-term decisions that seem practical, but become expensive over time. They buy smaller quantities at higher unit prices. They choose lower quality goods simply because the upfront cost is manageable. Over months and years, these small disadvantages accumulate. What looks like saving money today quietly reduces the ability to build wealth tomorrow. Economists sometimes describe this phenomenon as the poverty premium. It is the reality that those with fewer resources often end up paying more, while receiving less in return. Housing represents an even more powerful example. Without sufficient capital for a down payment, many individuals must rely on renting for extended periods. Monthly payments consume a large portion of income, yet ownership remains out of reach. Over decades, the total amount spent on rent can rival the cost of purchasing property, but the long-term benefits of asset appreciation belong to someone else. Labor, time, and youth are effectively transferred into the growth of another person's wealth. Meanwhile, property owners leverage rental income to service debt, maintain assets, and benefit from rising market values. This dynamic illustrates how financial systems can quietly redistribute opportunity. Scarcity also places a heavy burden on health and time. Individuals facing economic pressure are more likely to accept physically demanding or hazardous work. Preventive healthcare is often delayed due to cost concerns. Nutrition, rest, and long-term well-being become secondary priorities when immediate survival dominates decision-making. Eventually, untreated issues can evolve into serious conditions, requiring far greater financial and emotional resources to address. In contrast, those with financial stability can invest in prevention, insurance, and quality care. They use money to protect their health. Others are forced to sacrifice health in order to earn money. This trade-off can have irreversible consequences, yet perhaps the most damaging effect of persistent scarcity is cognitive. When daily life revolves around urgent financial concerns, food, rent, bills, education costs, mental bandwidth becomes limited. The human brain prioritizes immediate threats. Long-term planning, strategic thinking, and creative problem-solving gradually decline under constant pressure. It is not a matter of intelligence or motivation. It is a matter of capacity. Like an overloaded computer running too many demanding programs at once, decision-making becomes slower, narrower, and more reactive. Short-term survival begins to dominate long-term opportunity. This creates a powerful feedback loop. Scarcity encourages short-term thinking. Short-term thinking reinforces scarcity. When income becomes unstable, access to formal financial systems may also disappear. Without collateral or a strong credit history, individuals can be pushed toward high-cost borrowing options. Interest rates rise dramatically. Debt compounds. Financial stress intensifies. In extreme cases, people may find themselves working primarily to service obligations rather than to build a better future. Meanwhile, those with access to affordable capital continue to invest, expand, and accumulate. The gap widens, not always because of effort, but because of structure. Scarcity can also limit social mobility in less obvious ways. Feelings of insecurity or inadequacy may discourage individuals from entering unfamiliar environments or forming connections outside their immediate circles. Over time, social networks become narrower. Opportunities that rely on introductions, trust, or shared spaces become harder to access. This loss of social capital can be difficult to measure, yet its impact on life outcomes can be profound. Changing one's financial trajectory often requires not only income growth, but also access to new information, new perspectives, and new relationships. Understanding the true cost of poverty is not about blame or resentment. It is about recognizing the complexity of the system. Economic mobility is rarely a simple matter of earning slightly more money. It is often a long and demanding process of escaping structural constraints. A process that requires persistence, strategic thinking, and the gradual accumulation of multiple forms of capital. Because in many ways, poverty functions like gravity. It continuously pulls downward, and overcoming that force requires far more than effort alone. Escaping financial gravity requires momentum. In the early stages, survival is not about comfort. It is about accumulation. Small leaks in personal finances must be sealed. Impulsive consumption must be replaced with discipline. And the ability to delay gratification becomes one of the most valuable strategic skills. Building even a modest emergency buffer can fundamentally change decision-making. When basic security is in place, individuals regain the clarity to think beyond immediate survival. They can negotiate better, take calculated risks, and avoid selling their future at the lowest possible price. At the same time, protecting human capital becomes essential. For those without inherited wealth, their primary asset is themselves, their health, their time, their focus, and their skills. These resources must be treated with the same seriousness that investors apply to financial portfolios. Burnout, chronic stress, or neglected development can quietly erode long-term earning potential. In many ways, the most important investment during periods of scarcity is not external, it is internal. Another powerful strategy involves specialization. When resources are limited, spreading effort too widely can dilute progress. Instead, concentrating on a narrow domain, one that others may overlook or underestimate, can create disproportionate opportunity. Becoming highly competent in a specific niche allows individuals to command value, build reputation, and establish leverage. Over time, consistent expertise attracts clients, collaborators, and new forms of capital. Markets rarely reward general intention. They reward demonstrated usefulness. Technology has also reshaped the playing field. In previous generations, reaching large audiences required enormous financial investment. Today, digital platforms enable individuals with minimal capital to share ideas, build communities, and create economic value at global scale. Attention has become a new form of currency. Those who can provide insight, authenticity, or meaningful solutions may find that opportunities begin to approach them, rather than the other way around. In this environment, personal credibility and consistent contribution can be as powerful as traditional financial assets. Reinvestment is another decisive principle. Early income, no matter how modest, can serve as fuel for future growth. Instead of prioritizing status-driven consumption, strategic individuals often direct resources back into skill development, tools, or scalable ventures. This process is rarely glamorous. It may involve extended periods of restraint, uncertainty, and incremental progress. Yet over time, compounding effects begin to emerge. Small improvements accumulate, capabilities expand, options multiply. What once felt like survival gradually transforms into strategic positioning. Flexibility also represents an underrated advantage. Large institutions often move slowly, constrained by bureaucracy, legacy systems, or risk management protocols. Individuals operating with fewer resources can sometimes respond faster, exploring emerging trends, underserved markets, or unconventional solutions. This agility allows them to generate value in spaces that established players initially ignore. Rather than confronting dominant competitors directly, they can succeed by identifying overlooked problems and solving them more effectively. In free markets, customers ultimately reward usefulness, regardless of background. Mentorship and social learning can accelerate this journey. Guidance from experienced individuals may help avoid costly mistakes and reveal opportunities that are not immediately visible. Building such relationships requires humility, persistence, and genuine contribution. But when trust is established, even a single piece of strategic advice can save years of trial and error. Over time, these connections form an ecosystem of support, gradually reducing isolation and expanding possibility. Finally, resilience remains the defining factor. Progress within unequal systems is rarely linear. There will be rejection, misjudgment, moments of exhaustion. Yet those who continue refining their strategy, strengthening their capabilities, and maintaining long-term perspective often discover that persistence itself becomes a competitive advantage. Financial independence is rarely the result of a single breakthrough. More often, it is the cumulative outcome of disciplined decisions, adaptive thinking, and the refusal to disengage from the process. In this sense, the journey out of scarcity is not only economic, it is psychological. A transformation in how individuals perceive risk, opportunity, and their own potential within the system. In the end, the question is not whether the world is fair. It isn't. Some people begin life with advantages that may take others decades to build. Access, security, networks, and financial stability can shape entire trajectories long before effort even enters the equation. But history also shows something equally important. Economic systems are never static. Cycles shift, industries rise and fall, technology reshapes opportunity, and new players constantly emerge from unexpected places. Wealth that appears permanent can dissolve within a generation, while individuals who once struggled at the margins may gradually construct entirely new foundations, not only for themselves, but for those who come after them. This is why comparison can be so misleading. When we focus only on where others are standing today, we often overlook the invisible timelines behind their position. Every financial outcome is the result of accumulated decisions, made across years, sometimes across families. The real challenge is not to match someone else's starting point. It is to understand your own environment clearly enough to move strategically within it. In unequal systems, progress rarely feels dramatic. It often looks like restraint, like consistency, like choosing long-term stability over short-term validation. It may mean learning quietly while others appear to move faster, building relationships before opportunities become visible, developing skills that only reveal their value years later. These choices rarely generate applause, but they create momentum. And momentum, once established, can begin to change the direction of an entire life. There is also a deeper transformation that occurs along this journey. Financial independence is not only about assets or income, it is about perspective. It is about moving from reaction to intention, from survival to strategy, from being shaped by circumstances to gradually shaping them in return. Those who build their position step by step often develop a resilience that cannot be inherited or purchased. They learn to navigate uncertainty, to adapt when systems change, to recognize opportunity where others see only risk. Over time, this mindset becomes one of the most valuable forms of capital. Perhaps the most important realization is this: the finish line is not fixed. It is not a location predetermined by someone else's success, nor by the conditions into which we were born. It is something that evolves as we evolve. Each generation has the possibility to redefine what progress means, not only materially, but psychologically and socially. And in doing so, they leave behind more than wealth. They leave behind expanded possibility. The world may never become perfectly balanced, but within its complexity, there is always space for movement, for reinvention, for unexpected outcomes. The systems we inherit influence our journey, but they do not fully define it. And sometimes, the most meaningful victories are not the ones measured by status or comparison, but by the quiet moment when you realize that the direction of your future is finally in your own hands.